At first, the warriors did not see two creatures. They saw one. A towering shape moved through dust and broken sunlight, higher than any man, breathing hard, shining with sweat, iron, and fear. Its legs struck the earth like drums. Its chest pushed forward as if the ground itself belonged to it. And on its back sat another being, pale-faced, armored, holding a blade that flashed like water under the sun. For men raised in a world without horses, this was not simply cavalry. It was a wound in reality. The first Spanish horses that entered the Aztec world did more than carry soldiers. They carried confusion. They carried speed no foot warrior could match. They carried height, shock, noise, and the terrible impression that strangers from beyond the sea had arrived with animals powerful enough to bend the rules of war. But the story is not as simple as frightened men running from monsters. The Mexica, whom we often call the Aztecs, were not naive. They were builders of cities, masters of tribute, warriors of discipline, ritual, and calculation. Their capital, Tenochtitlan, rose from the lake like a vision of stone and water, crossed by causeways, guarded by temples, supplied by markets that astonished every European who saw them. They knew power. They knew terror. They knew how to make enemies submit. Then the horses came. Before the arrival of Hernan Cortes in 1519, Mesoamerica had no native horses. The animal had vanished from the Americas thousands of years earlier. In central Mexico, armies moved on foot. Goods moved by canoe or on the backs of human porters. Messages ran through relay systems. War was fought by men who closed distance with shields, darts, slings, obsidian-edged clubs, and spears. The battlefield was a human space, measured by breath, muscle, and ritual courage. Aztec warfare had its own logic. It was not merely killing. It was capture, prestige, intimidation, and political theater. Warriors advanced in ranks wearing quilted cotton armor, carrying round shields, jaguar skins, eagle feathers, and weapons that could cut flesh with terrifying sharpness. The macuahuitl, a wooden sword edged with obsidian blades, could maim and kill with a single committed strike. The otlotl hurled darts with force enough to pierce armor. Slings sent stones screaming across open ground. This was not a primitive military culture waiting to be shocked into silence. It was a sophisticated system, adapted to its world. And that is why the horse mattered so deeply. The horse was not just a new animal. It was a new category of movement. It compressed distance. It changed the height of combat. It created a platform from which a soldier could strike downward, retreat quickly, pursue the broken, and appear suddenly where no footman expected him. In the old order, a warrior read the intentions of another man by watching shoulders, feet, weapon angle, and breath. A mounted Spaniard brought another rhythm entirely, one driven by reins, hooves, panic, training, and animal force. The first encounters were wrapped in uncertainty. Along the coast, when Cortes and his men moved inland, stories traveled faster than armies. Messengers carried reports of floating houses on the sea, men with pale faces, weapons that roared, and great deer that carried warriors. The word was imperfect because the thing itself was unfamiliar. A horse was described through resemblance, not understanding. Imagine the first report reaching a lord far from the beach. Men from the coast kneel in a courtyard. They speak of strangers who ride animals larger than deer, animals that obey hand movements, animals that charge into crowds and scatter them. The listeners ask practical questions. How many? Do they eat men? Can they be killed? Are they gods, beasts, or merely trained servants? No answer is enough. In empires, information is a weapon. The Mexica state depended on fast messengers, tribute records, political memory, and a careful reading of signs. News of the strangers did not drift aimlessly. It moved through roads, markets, noble houses, and military councils. Each retelling sharpened the image and distorted it at the same time. A horse became a deer, then something larger than a deer, then a creature joined to a man, then a beast that could carry thunder into battle. That uncertainty mattered because the Aztec leadership had to decide what kind of threat stood before them. A raiding party could be punished. A rival city could be intimidated. A rebellious province could be isolated. But strangers with ships, iron, and mounted animals did not fit cleanly into existing categories. They demanded interpretation before they could be defeated, and interpretation takes time. Cortes understood the value of that uncertainty. He had only a small number of horses, and each one was precious. They were expensive to bring across the ocean, difficult to feed, vulnerable to injury, and few in number. Yet in the psychological economy of conquest, they were worth far more than their count. A dozen horsemen could look like a force multiplied by mystery. The Spaniards used them carefully. They displayed them. They rode them before allies and enemies. They let the animals snort, rear, and strike the ground. They allowed rumor to do what steel alone could not. For the riders, the horse was familiar and fragile at the same time. A Spanish horseman knew the power beneath him, but he also knew that a wounded horse could throw him into a crowd where armor became weight and confidence could vanish. Feed had to be found. Hooves had to survive roads and mud. Saddles, reins, girths, and bits had to be repaired. The animal was a weapon, but also a supply problem, a medical problem, and a constant risk. This is why horses were used as carefully managed shock, not as endless cavalry waves. Their value came from choosing the moment, a sudden charge into wavering men, a pursuit after a line broke, a display before negotiations, a rescue when Spanish infantry was being pressed too hard. The horse was most powerful when it entered the mind before it entered the body. But horses were not invincible. The men of Mexico learned quickly. Fear, in war, is often temporary when survival demands attention. Aztec warriors watched where the animal was vulnerable. They learned that horse and rider were not one creature. They learned that the animal could stumble, bleed, scream, and die. They learned that obsidian could open flesh, that darts could strike from angles, that spears could reach the belly or legs, and that terrain could weaken the advantage of speed. The landscape itself became a teacher. On open ground, a Spanish cavalry charge was a vision of impact. Hooves smashed into earth. Blades came down from above. Men who had never trained to receive cavalry had to judge speed they had never faced before. A line that held too long could be cut apart. A line that broke too soon could be ridden down. The horse turned hesitation into death. In the city, however, the advantage changed. Tenochtitlan was not a European plain. It was a lake city of causeways, bridges, canals, narrow passages, rooftops, temple steps, and sudden water. Horses needed space. They needed footing. They needed room to turn. In tight streets, a mounted man could become trapped. On a broken causeway, speed became danger. A horse that slipped into water could drag its rider toward panic. The city that seemed like a dream to the Spaniards could become a machine for limiting cavalry. Every bridge mattered. Every gap in a causeway mattered. A few feet of missing road could stop a horse as surely as a wall. A canoe appearing at the wrong angle could turn movement into confusion. Men fighting from rooftops could attack riders from above, reversing the usual height advantage. Stones and darts falling from close range could make the animal rear, twist, or bolt. In such a place, courage had to become engineering, and fear had to become a map. This is where the story becomes more human, and more brutal. The Spanish invasion was never a simple contest between horsemen and Aztecs. It was a storm of alliances, resentments, disease, steel, gunpowder, native rivalries, ambition, and miscalculation. Many indigenous peoples who hated Mexican domination joined Cortes, not because they worshipped him, but because empire creates enemies. Tlaxcalans and others provided warriors, intelligence, food, and knowledge of the land. Without them, the Spanish horses would have been dramatic, but isolated. Still, when battle came, the horse remained one of the most visible symbols of disruption. At moments of crisis, a cavalry charge could turn confusion into collapse. Horses were used to break formations, run down fleeing men, and protect Spanish soldiers when pressure became unbearable. Their size and speed created openings. Their noise unsettled inexperienced troops. Their riders carried lances and swords with the confidence of men who knew how shock could affect the mind before it destroyed the body. Yet Aztec resistance hardened. During the fighting in and around Tenochtitlan, warriors adapted their tactics. They dug pits. They used obstacles. They attacked from rooftops and canoes. They targeted horses with missiles. They fought across broken bridges and water channels where a mounted charge lost its clean line. The animal that once seemed supernatural became a tactical problem, still dangerous, but no longer beyond comprehension. This ability to learn under pressure is one of the most important parts of the story. Armies are often judged by whether they win, but adaptation can exist even inside defeat. The Mexica did not need a generation to understand that horsemen could be blocked, surrounded, or separated from infantry. They watched the Spanish depend on allies, roads, bridges, and timing. They learned that the rider was vulnerable when the horse stopped. They learned that terror could be studied. There is a powerful image in that change, a warrior who once froze at the sight of a horse now waiting for it, watching the hooves, measuring the turn of the rider, choosing the moment to strike. Adaptation did not mean victory. The forces pressing against Tenochtitlan were too many. Smallpox had entered the region and killed with a silence more devastating than any charge. Political alliances shifted against the Mexica. The Spaniards and their indigenous allies cut causeways, controlled water routes, built brigantines on the lake, and tightened the siege. Hunger began to do what courage could not stop. The city endured, then cracked. By 1521, Tenochtitlan was a place of exhaustion. Its temples still rose above the water, but the streets below were filled with smoke, bodies, broken walls, and the sound of a world being forced into another shape. Horses moved through that destruction where they could, no longer as impossible beings, but as instruments of a conquest that had become systematic. The siege stripped away illusion from both sides. Spaniards who had imagined quick domination discovered that a city could bleed them day after day. Mexica defenders who had once faced a handful of strange riders now faced a coalition, a blockade, disease, and hunger. The horse remained frightening, but the greater horror was the tightening pattern around the city, bridges seized, canals contested, food cut off, allies multiplying outside the walls, and the lake itself turned against its capital. The fall of the city did not happen because Aztec warriors were too afraid to fight horses. That is the shallow version, and history deserves better. The horse mattered because it arrived at the center of many other shocks. It magnified Spanish mobility. It deepened the first psychological blow. It helped Cortes project strength beyond his actual numbers. It gave allies and enemies something unforgettable to talk about. It made certain battlefield moments more violent, more sudden, and more terrifying. But the horse did not conquer Mexico alone. It was carried by men who exploited division. It was protected by native allies who understood the land better than the Spaniards did. It operated beside steel swords, crossbows, firearms, ships, disease, diplomacy, betrayal, and hunger. It was one weapon in a larger transformation. And still, symbolically, it was enormous. To see a horse for the first time in war is to confront an entire hidden history of domestication, breeding, riding, armor, saddles, stirrups, cavalry doctrine, and empire. Every hoofbeat contained centuries that Mesoamerica had not shared. The animal was not smarter than a warrior. It was not braver. But it represented a chain of technologies and habits that had developed somewhere else, then arrived all at once on the shore. That is one of the cruelest features of historical contact. Innovations do not always arrive politely, one by one, giving societies time to respond. Sometimes they arrive in a cluster, bound to men with weapons, hunger, and ambition. A people meets not one invention, but an entire foreign system moving at speed. For the Aztecs, the horse was that system made flesh. For the Spaniards, it was proof that the world they came from could be carried into worlds that had never seen it. For indigenous allies, it was both opportunity and danger, a tool that could weaken the Mexica today and strengthen Spanish power tomorrow. For the Mexica defenders, it was first a shock, then a weapon to be analyzed, then one more part of a siege that grew darker with every passing week. After the conquest, horses changed the Americas far beyond the ruins of Tenochtitlan. They spread north and south, escaped, multiplied, were traded, stolen, mastered, and transformed by indigenous peoples who became some of the greatest horse cultures in the world. The animal that first appeared as a weapon of invasion would later become part of resistance, mobility, hunting, raiding, identity, and survival across vast landscapes. History rarely allows a symbol to remain simple. The first Aztec warriors who saw horses were standing at the edge of an irreversible moment. They faced not only animals, not only Spaniards, not only steel, but the sudden collision of worlds that had grown apart for millennia. Their fear was real, but so was their intelligence. Their shock was real, but so was their courage. They watched, learned, fought, adapted, and died inside a storm no single weapon can explain. The horse did not make the old world disappear in one charge. It announced that the distance between worlds had ended. And once that distance ended, neither world would ever be untouched again.